All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going behind the scenes of adult education. We're going to look at the invisible blueprints, these really powerful philosophies that secretly shape pretty much every single class you've ever taken. So think about this for a second. Have you ever been in a class that was all about debating these huge, abstract ideas? And then maybe the next week, you're in another one that's just pure, hands-on, do this, then that skill training. It's like the difference between a book club and, learning to fly a plane. So what on earth explains that massive difference? Well, the answer, believe it or not, lies in philosophy. Yeah, really. It's kind of like the silent architect in the room, that invisible blueprint that decides everything. I mean, everything, from how the chairs are arranged to the ultimate goal of the learning itself. It's the why that's always driving the how. And these blueprints aren't static. They've been evolving for centuries. The whole story really kicks off way back in ancient Greece with what's called the liberal philosophy. Then it gets this huge shakeup in the early 20th century with the progressive movement. And then things get really interesting mid-century when it splits into two totally different paths, behaviorism and humanism, which eventually leads us to the radical and critical ideas we see today. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to quickly touch on why any of this theory stuff matters in the first place. Then, we're going to take a tour of the 5 big schools of thought. We're talking about education for pure knowledge, for practical experience, for measurable action, for self-discovery, and finally, for sparking social change. Let's get into it. Right, so first up, why even bother with theory? It can sound a little academic, right? Well, because without it, we risk what some thinkers call mindless activism. It's this idea that understanding the philosophy, the why, is what gives any action its real purpose. It's the difference between just doing stuff and actually knowing why you're doing it. Okay, our first stop on the tour is the oldest one of them all, the liberal tradition. You can think of this as the classicists' approach. I mean, this is the bedrock of Western education, born straight from the minds of giants like Plato and Aristotle. So what's it all about? At its heart, the liberal tradition says the whole point of education is to sharpen your intellect. It's about building a rational mind by digging into the best, most organized knowledge out there. It's all part of this really noble, classical search for what's true, what's good, and what's beautiful. And I guarantee you've seen this in action. You know the Great Books program, where you read and discuss these timeless, classic texts? That is a perfect example. In fact, the whole idea of a university core curriculum, the belief that there's a certain body of knowledge everyone should have to be considered truly educated, that comes straight from this philosophy. But what if learning isn't just about reading old books? As a reaction to that purely intellectual focus, a totally new idea popped up, the progressive philosophy. This is the pragmatist take on things, and it was championed by the absolute legend of education, John Dewey. See, Dewey argued that real learning isn't about passively absorbing ancient knowledge. No, it's about actively grappling with the world around you. His famous definition of education was the reconstruction of experience. So what does that mean? Basically, we learn by doing. We learn by solving real-world problems and then thinking about what happened so we can do better next time. And this shows you just how big a shift this was. You can see progressivism everywhere. In community schools that get students involved in solving local problems, in hands-on vocational training, even in citizenship classes that aren't just about memorizing facts, but about preparing people to actually participate in a democracy. The whole point is to make learning useful, right here, right now. All right, get ready for a sharp turn. We're moving away from the internal world of experience and pivoting to a philosophy that is only interested in external, observable action. Welcome to the behaviorist philosophy. This is the scientist's approach to education. So the core idea here, and it's heavily influenced by B.F. Skinner, is that pretty much all our behavior is just a result of conditioning, of rewards and punishments. So from this point of view, education isn't about inspiring minds. It's more like an active engineering. It's about carefully designing an environment with just the right triggers to produce a very specific, desired, and this is key, measurable behavior. Have you ever been in a corporate training where they kept talking about demonstrating a specific competency? Or maybe a certification program where it was all about a clear pass-fail hands-on test? Yep, that's behaviorism in the wild. It's all about accountability and getting results you can actually see and measure. And that's exactly why it's so huge in corporate and technical training. Okay, this brings us to a really major turning point, a huge fork in the road. Because while behaviorism sees the learner as basically a product of external forces, a completely different philosophy came along and argued the exact opposite. It said, no, the learner is guided by an inner drive, a drive for freedom, for choice, and for growth. And that right there is the humanistic philosophy. You could call it the nurturer's approach. It really grew up as a direct response, a counter-argument to behaviorism. It basically said, hold on a second, you can't understand learning just by watching what people do. You have to look inside, at the whole unique person. The big names here are people like Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow. And for them, the goal of education isn't to crank out skilled workers. It's to help a person become a fully functioning individual. It's about helping someone reach their full potential, what Maslow famously called self-actualization. The whole game is about personal growth, freedom, and unlocking what's inside a person. And trust me, its influence is absolutely massive, especially in the whole world of personal development. Think about self-help seminars, support groups like 12-step programs, even things like encounter groups. Basically, any kind of learning that puts the individual's feelings and their personal journey front and center, that's humanism in action. But the story doesn't end there, because even humanism, with its intense focus on the self, was challenged by our final philosophy, the radical and critical approach. This is the activist's philosophy, and it asks a really profound, maybe even uncomfortable question. What if the purpose of education isn't to fix the individual, but to fix society? The goal here, in one word, is liberation. The most famous thinker in this space, Paulo Freire, argued that real education has to involve something he called conscientization. It's a big word, but a powerful idea. It's the process where learners stop being passive objects that history just happens to, and they become active subjects who can see, name, and challenge the systems of oppression around them. And Freire's own work is the perfect example of this. He ran these incredible literacy campaigns in Brazil that didn't just teach people how to read words on a page. They taught them how to read the world, to understand the political and economic reasons for their own poverty. And that's what this philosophy does. It forces us to ask a really tough question. Is any education ever really neutral? Whew, okay, so after that whirlwind tour of 5 powerful, and let's be honest, often clashing philosophies, it brings us to the big question, right? Which one of them is the right one? And the answer is, it's a trick question. It's none of them, and it's all of them. See, the right philosophy is just the one that fits the goal. You would absolutely not use a book club philosophy to train an airline pilot, right? You need that high-stakes, skill-based, behaviorist approach. But for a deep-dive seminar on ethics, a liberal or humanistic approach makes way more sense. The context, the goal, that's everything. And that, right there, is the real takeaway. What you have now is a new toolkit, a set of lenses. So the next time you step into a classroom, a training session, any learning situation, you can start to see that invisible blueprint. You can spot the why behind the how. You can choose learning that actually serves your needs, and you can become a way more conscious and way more empowered participant in your own education. So I'm going to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Thinking about all this, what do you value most in your own learning? Is it knowledge just for the pure joy of knowing? Is it getting practical skills that you can use tomorrow? Is it about deep personal discovery? Or is it about changing the world? What is your personal philosophy of education?